So saying that the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry took almost 20 years to come into being, it was no small feat to get the community out to speak to the issues surrounding Aboriginal justice, and those of you that have been around the Aboriginal community, one of the jokes that we had in the PA was we were building the new jail facility. Well, it's not new anymore, but the young men that were building it were my friends, and so they'd go to work every day and lay the bricks, and at night they would laugh about, one day they'd be in there. So it actually happened in some cases. So it's a sad testament that that's the reality, that some will build the homes that they will spend the rest of their lives in. The Aboriginal Justice Inquiry had great promise for us as a people. That change. We have said, we have spoken, we've told you from our hearts and in our minds about what we believe the situation to be. And we had expected, once our stories were told, that change would occur. It didn't. And there were a lot of other things going on as well. There was Meech Lake, which was a powerful time for Canadians in general, but more particularly for us as Indigenous people, to hear Elijah Harper get up in the Manitoba legislature and say no and stop a bad deal. Well, some people might not say it was a bad deal now, but we believed it was, and still do, I imagine, for most people. But that was the first time in the history of this country, as Indigenous people, we had ever had anyone stand up and say, no, we've had enough. And that changed the course of history for our people. It was an opportunity for all of us to see a light at the end of the tunnel, that there is change taking place. And I have to say that I think that was an opportunity that was lost for us to bring the hearts and minds of all people together and develop a new relationship. Because I think for our leaders at the time, that we just weren't used to winning. That we didn't know what to do with the win. So it's much easier to fight when you're being brought up that way, and to be brought up in that anger. As well, in our most recent history, yours and mine, is the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, the Kelowna Accord, the Amnesty Report on Missing and Murdered Women, the Aboriginal Justice Implementation Commission, where again we had hope, and I have to say that there were some things that had transpired from that report, including the transfer of the administration of Child and Family Services to Indigenous organizations, and I'm really proud of Professor Whitecloud and her work in being a commissioner on the AJIC. And I thank her for her continuing involvement and standing up for our people. And again, there was the guidance of the Supreme Court on Gladue, or Section 7, 18.2e. So I was, because I was working in the justice system, I thought for my master's work that I'd like to do something on leadership in Aboriginal justice. And the most, striking thing to do was to look at the guidance in the Supreme Court on Gladue and how it was applied in Manitoba provincial courts. Because the number of those incarcerated in Manitoba had continued to increase from the time of the AJI report in 92, 93 to 2005. I think it went up about 20%. So what extent was it being used in Manitoba courts? So I had interviewed community people, members of the judiciary, members of the defense bar, and it was generally felt across the board that there were some circumstances in which the factors were being utilized. But one of the difficulties was that probation services and it had been mentioned before, had been do the pre-sentence reports, and pre-sentence reports are about risk factors. Is it safe to leave this individual in the community? And Gladue is about, finding out what are the circumstances and what trauma affected this individual to become involved in the criminal justice system. So I think it would be difficult for a person to do their job as a probation officer to define risk factors and then talk about the difficulties of the individual. And the reports that have gone to the court are glaring in presenting what the difficulty it is for that particular writer. The other factor is those in the defense bar don't raise the accused's Aboriginal identity in court. And then in cases where people have been asked, have asked their defense representative to apply those factors, to ask for those factors to be applied, they have been told, oh, it's too late, or we don't have the resources to do a report, we don't have the time, or who's going to write the report? So as a result, it's never presented to the courts. The judiciary have also said, well, we don't ask for a report because we know the circumstances of Aboriginal people. We've been in these communities for 20 years, and we see the same people. So because we live here, we know what their circumstances are. And then finally, one of the challenges that's presented is if you ask if an individual is Aboriginal, could you be seen as a racist? Could you be seen to be discriminatory? So it seems those involved in the justice system that sit at whatever table have taken the position of don't ask, don't tell. So, and then for our people, it takes so long from the first appearance to sentencing, and many times, they are incarcerated, or I don't think they call it incarcerated, they're held in remand until that sentencing takes place, and so they just go, let's get it over with. If it's going to cause the time to be extended, then I'm just going to plead guilty, and do whatever time is given. So then, what brings the Indigenous people to appear before the courts in the first place? And so we talked a bit about some of the major problems, but you know, it's like this, when we talk about it being a spiral effect. So from the beginning of time, in the beginning of the relationship between Indigenous people and others, we've been constantly confronted with a process of termination in the first instance when I guess second contact, where money was offered for a scalp. So there was, and so, you know, we put our heads down as Indigenous people and came up and said, oh, we're still here. And governments said, oh, you're still here, let's try residential schools. So put our head down, 7 generations. Put our head up again, oh, we're still here. Oh, okay, well, let's do something else. And so it's been kind of that, it has been that relationship. So for us as a people, we have to say, we're here to stay. And for governments, we've got to say, okay, you know, you're here to stay, so let's find a way that we can resolve these issues. Let's look at one another respectfully and live in this world together, because that's what it comes down to. So now you have children or adults that come before the courts that have these generations of anger and distrust, which has brought them to the courts in the first place. I'm not, so how do you turn that around? And certainly Gladue gives the justice system an opportunity to turn it around. I know that those in the justice system will say we're not social workers, but it's all of our responsibility. Certainly the courts will be the last place that change can be made. So when we're talking about risk factors, let's not just talk about the risk factors of keeping the individual in the community, but what are the risk factors of incarcerating an individual? I had a phone call from a father yesterday whose son had been sentenced and did 5 years in Stony Mountain. And part of that was an administrative extension to his original sentence. So he was out and went to visit his father on the weekend, and he was wearing gang colors. When he went into the system, he was not wearing gang colors. And now his younger brother is living with him, and his dad phones and he's crying. He says, he wasn't like that before he went in. Now he's going to turn his brother into a gang member. What can I do? What can we do? And so I think he said he's going to end up at a funeral home. Then what am I going to do? You know, that complete frustration. And they get that through incarceration. So I think that should be another point when considering alternatives to incarceration. By incarcerating individuals, are you going to make them more susceptible to crime, or to committing crime, or ultimately their own death? There's another story I want to share with you, because all of these stories affect us. And I know my time is up, but I'll be really quick. I won't tell you that story. So I don't think that when we talk about part of the frustration with implementing Gladue, and not just in Manitoba but across the country, is that it's presented as a lighter sentence by all the players. The media says, you know, that people that where these Gladue factors are implemented will get a lighter sentence, and that's not necessarily the case. And the Gladue report should not be seen as just as a tool to assist the courts. I think it should be seen as a tool to assist the offender in gaining a new vision of themselves and to repair the trauma in their lives that have caused them to offend, and in some cases re-offend. And one thing I know for sure is that the justice system cannot be left alone to figure out this problem. And the issue involves a whole system response from government and from the Indigenous community. It needs to involve such diverse voices as Child and Family Services. As we know, the research has shown that most offenders have had intervention with CFS. Government departments such as healthy living, education, and respected elders and healers from the Indigenous community should be involved in determining a new solution. The application of Gladue, or the factors in Gladue, should be part of the coursework in law school and part of the continuing education of those involved in the legal system and in the administration of justice. And then most importantly, it would require governments to release their own fears and Indigenous people to again be open to sharing not just power, but a sense of how power is shared and how healing and reflection can overcome the trauma. And it means not just saying that this is too big of a problem for me, or it's not my problem. It means stepping up to our competence as a just society to create an opportunity to address long-term change and make a difference. It's not about what factors create a difference and how many days an Aboriginal offender is sentenced or not. It's about creating an alternative that removes the barriers to equality in a fair and just society. Perhaps it is an opportunity to co-create between governments and Indigenous people the Aboriginal Justice Commission as recommended in the AJI and formed in the AJIC. That's the present.